Hello and welcome to the 9th episode of my trip down memory lane back to the Pacific Crest Trail and my Thru-hike exactly 10 years ago. In the last episode we hiked all the way to Independence, but we did a pretty long side trip through Onion Valley to get there, a beautiful route, and now we are in Independence. Independence is in the desert again, which was totally crazy, that we were a short drive of maybe 15-20 minutes from the high mountains, suddenly back in total desert, in the heat. That was really, really strange. Yeah, so we went to Subway first, had a proper meal, and then we pitched our tent at the local campground. We were the only people there, and then we just hung out there, enjoyed the evening a bit, and spent the night there. And the next day, we went to Subway again, as you do as a thru-hiker, to get as much food in as possible. But that was also because the post office wasn't open until 12 o'clock or something like that. And we just had to get some time in. When it did open, we picked up our resupply package. Then we went to Subway again and met a German guy there. Or I think we'd met him the night before, but he was somehow stranded in Independence. He was also a thru-hiker, but he'd already been in town for a few days and somehow didn't get any further. But it wasn't because of his physical condition or something. He had some kind of blockage, a mental block, I think. And I think he needed a bit of motivation by other thru-hikers to get out of Independence again. And so we managed to persuade him to come back with us. And then in the end, we hiked back together. So the hitch down was practically impossible, as I said in the last episode. But there were two cars that took us back to the mountains, and yeah, it was really, really crazy. You know, yesterday morning mountains, evening desert. This morning desert, evening mountains. It's totally crazy. But luckily we didn't lose our acclimatization because of the short stay we had in the valley, and it actually went on quite well straight away. So we were really able to start hiking again straight away. The other German, I don't remember what his name was, he was not in the best condition because he had been down for a while, so, he had to acclimatize again. But he hiked with us, and while we were hiking, the sun went down and created these great, wonderful colors. So here we looked down towards the PCT, where we would hike again in a moment. And this is just on top of Kearsarge Pass, right at the top. And that's the Onion Valley down there where we came from. Yeah, down at the bottom, there was Independence. And you can see, it's a bit hard to see, but you can see that it's total desert again. It was just a bizarre feeling to be back in the high mountains now after this short trip down to the desert. Even though it's quite dry here, but on the other side of Kearsarge Pass, you can already see the lakes and the forest again. And to be honest, I was quite happy to get back there out of the heat because I really enjoyed this different climate. And yeah, as I said, the sun was setting and the Alpenglow was coming out, and it was just so beautiful. When you're hiking there and see these great mountain panoramas at nightfall, it's amazing. Yeah, we then hiked, 2 miles or something like that from Kearsarge Pass, and then looked for a campsite to pitch our tent, and we reached the campsite in the dark and set everything up there. The other German guy was also there, and we sat around together for a while, and then we went into the tents pretty quickly to go to sleep. Yeah, these are a few more impressions of Kearsarge Pass. Me up there again, you can see from my face that it was a bit exhausting, or maybe I'm sunburned, I don't know. In any case, red face and is definitely not uncommon on the PCT. Yeah, the next day we went straight on to the next pass. We kind of left the German guy behind us. He wanted to come along but said he'd be a bit late, and we never saw him again after that. I don't know if he went on or if he went back down to Independence. I have no idea, but I hope he went on. Nonetheless, we went straight up to the next pass pretty soon after we started walking. I can't remember what it was called. There were so many passes on this section we were walking now that it was impossible to remember all the names. But I can remember that it was very exhausting. So that day down and back up again and then over Kearsarge Pass twice, that took a bit of a toll on us, or on me in any case. but the others weren't quite as fit as they had been before too. So, but yeah, we managed to power our way up there, and that wasn't to be the last pass of the day. We had planned to do 2 passes that day. Really brutal, but somehow it didn't make sense to do otherwise in terms of mileage. Otherwise, we would have had a really short day, and yeah, so we decided to go over 2 passes that day. But of course, the views were always fantastic, and are these amazing clear mountain lakes with great tasting water, where you can dip your feet in and go for a swim. I don't think we went swimming here, but because we had quite a lot of hiking ahead of us. But yeah, we definitely went swimming more often later. We were also on the John Muir Trail now, which is one of the most famous long-distance trail in the US, and it overlaps with the PCT over a relatively long stretch, which you notice not only from the signs, but also from the masses of people who are suddenly on the trail. The PCT is not a lonely trail on its own, but the John Muir Trail in comparison is like a busy city, if you like. And you notice that relatively soon. People generally came from the other direction, so most people walked against the direction of the PCT, against the northbounders. Yeah, it was quite interesting to meet them like that and then briefly exchange information and so on. But I quickly got annoyed by the crowds, and yeah, that was somehow no longer the kind of solitary experience I was actually looking for. Although, as I said, you rarely get that on a PCT anyway. Yes, but after this bridge, we finally reached another milestone. 800 miles. After taking a long time to cover these 100 miles because we were constantly off trail, we're finally here. And now it's 7 miles uphill to the next pass, and shortly after that, we will camp. Yes, 800 miles. 800 miles was finally another milestone. Somehow I missed seeing these markers. I just had the feeling that we weren't making any more progress, which is logical. We went up Whitney, which took us 2 days. We went down to Independence, which took us 2 days. But all in all, it just, it took us longer to cover these 100 miles, of course, than the other 100 miles. And that annoyed me a bit at some point. I somehow had the feeling that we have to achieve something again. We have to make progress again. We're kind of, treating water here. It was also the case that I wasn't making as much progress as I would have liked. One reason for this was that there was snow, and the other was simply a lot of scree. And in other words, both surfaces on which you can't make rapid progress. Well, and then I was really pleased about this 100 mile mark, the 800 mile mark. Yeah, here in this blurry photo, you can see me on the second pass of the day. And I remember sitting there with Andy, and we were totally exhausted. It wasn't just the second pass of the day, it was the third pass in 24 hours, because we had also done Kearsarge Pass the evening before. And you have to imagine that these passes, the PCT is actually very pleasant to walk over long stretches. It's relatively flat, and when you do go up a mountain, it's going in switchbacks. But some of these passes were really, really brutal. They were very steep. It was difficult to walk in parts, and above all, there was always a huge difference in altitude that had to be covered. You can see that here. We are a few hundred meters higher than the valley we walked through before. You come this way somehow, and then you walk up this pass and straight back down on the other side. It's super strenuous for the cardiovascular system at first, but also for the knees, for example. So I was very, very happy that I had trekking poles. I can remember that I often took a break standing up, leaning on the poles simply to catch my breath. Brutal. And doing 3 passes in 24 hours is simply very, very exhausting. Especially with a fully loaded pack with a week of food, And yeah, we were pretty exhausted down here. But then we wanted to camp at these little lakes here. And when we set up there and saw it, we were really happy. We had discussed where we were going to camp beforehand. To see that after the 2 passes, it was so nice. We took a break at the top, a longer break, because we just couldn't hike on because we were so done. But just having the view on where you want to go to see it was simply beautiful. beautiful redemptive situation when we were sitting there. And yeah, this one's nice too. I thought it would be nice to cruise down there on an air mattress, but I didn't do it, of course. It's too dangerous. But that would really be something. Yeah, water was really omnipresent now, and it was simply wonderful. It was so nice that you could get your feet wet every now and then. I often got my bandana wet and then tied it around my head because it was just nice to be cool on my head. And of course, above all, you didn't have to carry a lot of drinking water, which was just great. Yeah, and then it went on like that, always up, down, up, down. This section was really, really exhausting as far as climbing passes was concerned. We actually went over a pass every day, but, and this is something I really, really appreciated even later in Washington. Every time you went over a pass, you were in a different world, so to speak. The valleys were all a bit different. One valley, like this one, had green meadows and somehow streams or what. And other valleys were rather barren and perhaps had a lot of lakes. Some valleys were also snowy, full of snow because the sun couldn't reach them. That was totally fascinating. And every time you walked up a pass like that, you imagined something like, what will it look when we get over there? And that was always very nice. Here you can see two very different valleys, for example. So this photo is a bit blurred, but here it's quite green and here it's quite barren. So it was always different when you came across a pass, and I thought that was really cool. Yeah, we definitely bathed in here. I remember coming up there and thinking, wow, it's cool. We're going to have a bath now. And then we took a longer break somewhere by the lake, I think down here somehow. I don't know exactly, or here. And then we had a nice swim there. And yes, swimming in mountain lakes like that, I love it. I just love doing that in Norway too, but only if the weather is good, of course. So the last 2 years I've actually only had rain in Norway, so I didn't go swimming at all. It's a bit of shame. But when it's warm and everything, I like to jump in. And especially when you don't have showers or anything like that, it's just really pleasant. I often washed my clothes in there too. It was so warm that you could just lay them on the stone, and an hour later or so they were all dry again. And I have to say the clothes got cleaner this way than in the laundromat, which was always very fascinating. But yeah, I've always enjoyed using something like that. Yeah, now the first waterfalls were slowly appearing again and again. So Yosemite National Park is coming soon. It's famous for its many waterfalls, of course, and we have this first, a bit more remarkable waterfall here. Yeah, this was quite funny too. It's like a split stone here, and someone has put little stones in there, like teeth of some kind. I don't know, a monster or what. I found that quite funny. Land art is something I do enjoy. You're not actually supposed to do that. Yeah, I don't know. I'm a bit neutral about the whole thing. So I like to see it when there is such a thing. But yes, as far as leave no trace principles are concerned, it's actually not allowed to do something like that. But yeah, everyone has to know for themselves whether they do it or not. I don't do it myself, but when I see something like that, I enjoy it. And yeah, I think it looks cool and funny. Yeah. And then probably the most famous pass on the PCT after Forester is the Muir Pass. John Muir, the namesake of the John Muir Trail, is a very well-known American outdoorsman and philosopher who is omnipresent in the High Sierras due to the John Muir Trail, of course, and his various quotes from him that are all over the place. Yeah, and on the Muir Pass, a very beautiful pass, there is this little round hut here. Muir Hat, what else would it be called? I don't think he built it, but it's dedicated to him, and it's a very prominent point on the PCT that everyone knows. And yeah, somehow it's also a little highlight in the High Sierras. I remember that I got up there relatively easy, so the passes on the day before, they did a great job in terms of my training. The Muir Pass is actually quite a long pass because it's just a bit longer than the other passes, but I got up there well and then took a really long break at the top. And there were so many people there. We can only see 3 people here now, but there must have been 25 people or so during the time I was there. And it was kind of nice. I just said it annoyed me that it was so crowded, but it wasn't always like that. So there were definitely moments when I was happy to meet other people, especially during the breaks or something, just to socialize a bit. I think I'm actually more the type of person who likes to hike alone, but also likes to join others at camp and so on. Anyway, I stayed there for a long time and enjoyed the view, had a good meal, and at some point I went back down and then walked down to our planned camp. On the way there, I passed these brilliant views. It's just that this picture in particular represents the High Sierras for me, because it somehow perfectly depicts this rugged beauty with these jagged mountains and the scree and the moss and the lakes. It's simply beautiful. We camped here in the evening. Another perfect spot for camping. You can see here that it was right on the lake. It's just a dream to live in an environment like this, so to speak, with this huge, spectacular garden. It was always wonderful to have such great campsites. That's also something I always enjoy on every hiking trip, when I have campsites and wake up in the morning and there is still a bit of mist in the valley, or the humidity is different. It somehow smells like morning, and the silence and everything slowly wakes up. I love it when I look out of my tent in the morning and I'm simply in the middle of nature. It's a feeling that you cannot describe, that you can't convey to anyone who hasn't experienced it. I don't think that this is possible. And to describe what a freedom that is, what a mood you find yourself in, and what strength it gives you for the following day. Yeah, there were now more and more river crossings, small creeks and so on. We actually had several every day, and here this was the first somewhat larger river crossing. So the trail arrives here. You can see a post here, so you can probably not see it on the video, but the trail basically ends here, and on this side of the river was the next signpost, and then you knew, okay, we just have to go through here. And it was totally fine. I've crossed much more rapid rivers and much colder rivers in Iceland and Norway, where you really have to search for a long time for a place where it could potentially work out when you're standing on the edge. And that wasn't a problem here at all. It was just that it suddenly got deep at some point. I couldn't really see that before from where I started. And then it went up to my knees. I still had things in my pockets of my trousers, so I quickly repackaged everything while I was standing in the river, but that was no problem at all. It was really easy to walk through there because the current was very weak, and but you can see from the sign here that it can be quite dangerous at certain water levels, and these are actually the few situations in which people do die on the PCT. During river crossings. You just have to slip once or get swept away and hit a rock, and that's it. But in our year, there was very little snow and correspondingly little meltwater, and that meant the river crossings were all relatively easy for us. I can only remember one very difficult crossing, but that was much later. It wasn't in the High Sierras. Yeah, well, something like that here, if you were to cross at this point, that wouldn't be so great, of course, or here, but we always crossed like that, and it was really easy. Most of the time you could even cross without taking your shoes off, because you could walk over stones or tree trunks. It was really easy in principle. But I still always thought it was cool, because I just love seeing running water. I think rushing rivers have an incredible attraction towards me. I just like to see the water foaming up and all of that. For me, it has such a raw elemental force that I see there, and I really like it. Yeah, here's another compilation of such images. It's simply bombastic. Here, this is also very beautiful, a panoramic view down from a pass like this. It's just a small pass, probably not a pass at all, not even really a pass, but it's just an example of what the view was really like from where you could be standing. Simply breathtaking, isn't it? Yeah. And I thought that was cool. I saw that once. There are definitely 1 or 2 tourist spots in the Sierras, like VVR or Muir Ranch, stuff like that. And some of them are completely cut off from any roads or infrastructure, and they are either supplied by helicopter or by horse. And in this case, it was one of those, I mean, you could probably call it a mule and horse caravan. You can see that they are all totally packed here, and there's food, equipment, and parcels from hikers that they have sent there. And I think it's crazy that it's still done like that, but it's nice. And I did enjoy this view. Yeah, this is a Ptarmigan, I think. Another new animal that we haven't seen before, and above all, it has a chick with it. I think it's about to show. Yeah, right there. Very cute, yeah. As I often said, I've always loved seeing animals. I think generally just nice when you become part of nature, when it shows itself to you, that it doesn't close itself off to you and somehow signals to you that you're part of it. I always find that very beautiful. Yeah, here. Oh yeah, what can I say? This view is simply amazing. You can see how small you are compared to these huge dimensions. It always brings you back to reality, down to earth, how small you are, how insignificant you are when you put yourself in relation to this natural system. It's always been fascinating and always somehow healthy to realize that the world doesn't revolve around you, that you're not the center of everything, but that you're actually just a very small light. And if you were gone, the world would hardly be any different. That may sound sad and tragic, but in the end, it's actually a very reassuring realization that you are only a part of something huge. You are a part, yes, but only a very small one. And somehow that's nice. It gives you a kind of peace. At least me. Yeah, so this is the first butterfly I think I saw on the trail. It's a dovetail, and it's the first one I saw in a while. Later, I saw another butterfly named Morning Cloak, which is also a very beautiful butterfly, pretty rare too. So is the dovetail, quite rare. I used to see them often at my parents' place in the area, but they're all gone somehow. I don't know if they already extinct or something. It's very tragic, of course. But, butterflies are my favorite animals. I find them super interesting and beautiful, and I was really pleased to see one on the trail. Yeah, here's another one. I don't know exactly what kind of squirrel this is. It was definitely a bit bigger than the chipmunks, but I don't know how it's called. But it was very curious. They're somehow not so shy. I don't know if they... It was generally the case in the High Sierras that the animals weren't very shy, including the deer. That was kind of strange to me because in Germany, when you run across a deer, they immediately run away. I don't know if it's because there is no hunting allowed in the national parks, or at least not much hunting. They somehow are not afraid of humans, and I think they don't see us as enemies, which of course is nice. Some deer even walked through our camp at night. I woke up once at night and I heard footsteps, and I thought there were a lot of people in the camp, which was, of course, scary. And then I looked under the tent fabric and saw deer feet. And I was like, okay, there's just a lot of deer in the camp. And that was, of course, reassuring, because somehow you're still afraid of people, especially the ones that sneak around your tent at night. Yeah, but as I said, somehow they weren't afraid at all of humans. And I did like that. It's really nice. What I didn't like was that the High Sierras are really full of mosquitoes. We must have caught a year when there were relatively few mosquitoes, as people told me, but it still was no fun at all. First of all, they are gigantic, and they are everywhere. As soon as you stopped, you actually had to walk around with this head net, because otherwise they would have been all over your face straight away. And I always wore long clothes. In the evening, we didn't sit in the camp as we had done before, but simply ate in the tents, which you're supposed not to do because of the bears. But there was simply no other way. It was such a nuisance. So I remember when I got out of the tent, it was always a 2-person job. So one of us ran out like super fast, and the one who was still inside quickly zipped the tent up again, because otherwise they would have been in the tent straight away. It really wasn't much fun, but well, that's part of it. And on the other hand, I didn't have a single tick on the tray, which is, of course, very nice. And I'd much rather have mosquitoes, even if they were really annoying, than ticks. Then we slowly continued towards Red's Meadow. We hadn't planned anything there in terms of resupply or anything like that, but we wanted to eat something there, and we also knew that there were good hiker boxes. And so we planned for that a little bit. And yep, to get there, we then walked through this simply wonderful landscape. It really is. The High Sierras really are an outdoorer's dream. Really incredibly beautiful. On the way we passed this marker, a third of the way done. I thought that was a lot. So a third is a lot even now when I think about the fact that we were only in week 9. Yeah, a third is almost halfway, and then we're already approaching the end. That was crazy at the time. A bit sad too. I was always in the mode of not wanting it to end, because it's so great, because I love it so much. But of course, you're still really proud to have made it a third of the way. That was a great achievement, and yeah. We went swimming again in the lake. I remember that too. That was also very refreshing. Or I think I swam there on my own. I often did that, even in rivers when I took a break. I just went in quickly, ate something while my clothes were drying out, and then went on walking. It was always super refreshing. So I was definitely at my best in the High Sierras in terms of hygiene, because I was constantly able to wash myself. And then we cracked the 900-mile mark. Yes, 900 miles, another 100 miles done. That was much quicker than the 100 miles before, because we just kept going on and actually made relatively fast progress. We weren't able to walk as many miles in an hour as we did in the desert, but we simply walked longer because we didn't have to take siestas. So of course we still took a lunch break, but not for 4 or 5 hours like in the desert, but just for 1 or 1.5. So we were able to walk as much during the day as we did in the desert. And yeah, 900 miles, only 102,000. That was really cool. And then we arrived in Red's Meadow. There was this beautiful signpost, which I always like, stuff like that. Even if it's somewhere random, I don't know, in Barcelona or something, and then it says so and so many kilometers to New York, so and so many kilometers to Oslo, and so on. I always find that interesting. And yeah, it wasn't that extreme here, but there were definitely a few points. Canada, Mexico, of course, but also Tuolumne Meadows, where we wanted to go next, and Mount Whitney, where we had just came from, and that was already another 165 miles in, as it says. That wasn't bad. And yeah, here's the larger map of the area. I always like it when there's a big map somewhere. I always look at it, even if I have a map with me, because I like to visualize how I'm getting on and how I'm doing progress and what to expect next. I always like that. Yeah, in Red's Meadow itself, we cleared out the hiker boxes and just spent lunch there. And there was a bus that could have taken us to Mammoth, I think. We thought about it briefly, also because my friend needed new shoes, but we didn't do it, and we didn't really want to waste any time there, so to speak. We still had enough food for the next stage, and so yeah, we just enjoyed our time there and then wandered out again in the afternoon. But we continue with that in the next episode with quite a highlight, I think. But until then, as always, please subscribe to the channel if you liked it, like the video. And if you have anything to tell or any questions, feel free to write them in the comments. And otherwise, I see you in the next video. Ciao!